Hi, everyone. We'll just give people a minute to enter into the webinar. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the fourth webinar of a four-part series brought to you by NERC and NUMOA as part of an EPA-funded project focused on anaerobic digestion, regulation, and environmental justice. This webinar is focused on environmental justice and in anaerobic digestion, green solutions, just outcomes. I'm Marianne Remolidor, Assistant Director of the Northeast Recycling Council. Before we get started, I'd like to review some housekeeping details. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. A recording of the webinar and a copy of the presentation will be available on the NERC and NUMOA websites, and you will receive an email with a link. Please use the chat to ask any questions for the presenters, which we'll get to once everyone is finished speaking. You will receive a brief survey after the webinar. If you could please complete this, it'll help us assess the impact of this event. Please keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar. Today we have two great presenters who are our project partners. Sharon Lewis is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Coalition for Economic and Environmental Justice and has dedicated over 30 years to raising awareness about the disproportionate impact the placement of regional waste facilities, such as landfills and incinerators, have in low wealth and communities of color, which are already burdened with high levels of pollution and other environmental hazards. Bobby Wilding is the co-founder of Clean and Healthy New York with over 20 years of environmental health advocacy experience. Without further ado, Bobby and Sharon, would you share your presentation?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
All right. So we are grateful to have been working with NUMOA and NERC on this project and to have had it been supported by the US EPA. And so without further ado, we'll just jump right in. To start things off, we're just hoping folks can put in the chat which constituency are you part of? So we've got a lot of different kinds of perspectives that could be in the room. Are you a community member? Are you a regulator? Are you representing like a local municipality? Do you sell or hope to site anaerobic digestion facilities? Just help us understand who's participating. Thanks, I see them coming in. See a lot of folks from different government institutions. See some community folks, great. Community planning. Food waste generator, great. Awesome. So we've got a really broad set of stakeholders here in the virtual room today. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And if you haven't put it in, please keep it going. But I'm going to pass it over to Sharon to kick off the content.
Great. Thank you so much, Bobby. What we'll discuss today? Well, we're going to briefly refresh what anaerobic digestion is. And we will also talk about how it's important to understand what it means to site a facility in an environmental justice area. We're going to focus a lot on learning about the community, effective community engagement, and things that you should consider beyond regulatory requirements. After that, we're going to go into a brief Q&A as well as a brief survey for feedback. So I don't know if you all can see this, but can you put into the chat what you think is wrong with this picture? Also, if you don't understand or can't see very clearly what it is, put that into the chat as well, and we will explain what this is. But what is wrong with this picture? I see some great responses. Wonderful. Well, keep it coming, and I'll just talk to you briefly about the origins of this picture and what occurred when it occurred. I happened to be in Boston in September, and I visited Quincy Market, where they sell a lot of fruits and vegetables. At the end of the day, they reduced the price of everything, half price. This was Saturday. They don't operate on Sunday. So Saturday, they just wanted to slash the prices. And at exactly 5 o'clock, I was shocked and appalled to see garbage trucks, several of them, just back up into the area. And what you're seeing are pallets of strawberries being loaded into the garbage. Good strawberries, edible strawberries, but the market was closing and nobody wanted to give it away. There clearly was no option to send it to a shelter or a food bank or somewhere where someone could utilize this. So they made the decision to throw this food away. In the truck that you see, the blue truck, those are pallets of strawberries. And if you can see a little sliver of another truck to the right, it's a closer view of another truck, but there's strawberries and tomatoes on the ground. This was so shocking and appalling that several people, including myself, took photos. This is not the type of photo to take where, oh, this is what happened to me in Boston. I think most of the people who took the picture were so shocked they had to have visual proof of what they were actually seeing in this day and age where people were actually throwing food away. Next slide.
So this is just to, again, that promised refresher on what anaerobic digestion is. This is one possible way to take food waste and other organics and convert it into materials that can go back into the nutrient cycle or the material cycle or energy cycle. And so this is a broad description of anaerobic digestion where it's sort of, this is agnostic about what kind of inputs you have. We will talk about it again in a second, but I would caution that if we're talking about creating anaerobic digestion digestate that can be used for things like fertilizer or other places where it's going back onto the land, mixing biosolids and food waste will result in a toxic mix that does not actually improve the soil, but can actually spread contamination and things like PFAS. But food waste anaerobic digestion can go out into these different uses. It's some of it it's capturing the gases that are created during digestion, so actually retaining them rather than having them released into the environment, and then having this digestate that can go on to being a different variety of materials.
Okay, so what are some of the benefits of anaerobic digesters? As you can see by this slide, there's reduced organic waste, renewable energy generation, improved soil health, improved environmental health, and there's elimination of fossil fuel-driven pollution, and there are employment issues or concerns or benefits. And I say issues, concerns, and benefits all together because the benefits are often turned into issues and concerns because the communities are offered jobs that don't really pan out to what they expected them to be.
And so, as I mentioned before, it's important to consider what your inputs are into anaerobic digesters. While we flagged that the outputs from an anaerobic digester can improve soil health, there's actually a lot of different factors to go into whether it's beneficial or detrimental, depending on how much carbon is left in the digestate, depending on the soil makeup, the texture. There are a lot of different factors. So it's useful to contemplate sort of the whole picture and making sure that we're leveraging the maximizing benefits if anaerobic digestion is part of the solution and minimizing any drawbacks.
And I might add that one of the primary benefits in environmental justice communities is that anaerobic digestion eliminates the reliance on fossil fuel driven waste management facilities such as incinerators and landfills. So let's talk about just what an environmental justice community is. As you may or may not know, each state defines this differently. For example, in the state of Connecticut, the primary indicator is economics or income. But generally, it involves low wealth people, many living below the poverty level, it's an area, neighborhood, or community that's populated by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And one of the primary features of an environmental justice community is that the community already has a disproportionate number of facilities that cause environmental health and environmental problems, period, leading to a reduced quality of life.
So I wanted to start by actually asking the question. So this is the context of this conversation really came out of the challenge that we are all facing with food being wasted. And there are a lot of solutions that could be put in place well before you have food scraps that need to be disposed of as waste. For example, in the example that Sharon was showing, right, we could start by coming up with solutions to ensure that the food after a farmer's market is actually distributed to institutions that could help and distribute the food to people who are hungry, right? So, there are a lot of different strategies that are upstream. So once you've dealt with that, then considering whether anaerobic digestion is a strong component is going to vary depending on what your outcomes are, what your focus is, and where you're based. But so then once you've thought about that, considering the geographic constraints of siting a facility, so if you want your anaerobic digester to be close to the source of the wasted food, that is definitely one issue to try to reduce the footprint of the waste handling. And then looking at the communities where this might be sited, considering socioeconomic conditions, whether or not there are already a disproportionate number of facilities that could be increasing truck traffic, releasing pollution, having other impacts on that community. Taking a look to determine whether there are places that are not as impacted right now to consider, as opposed to adding to an area that's either already an environmental justice area or otherwise disproportionately impacted. And then considering in the design and thinking about the solutions, how to minimize the health and environmental impacts of that facility, including things like transportation, noise, smell. We'll cover some more of those in later slides. But I do think it's really important to make sure that this is one possible option among many to address wasted food, and it's always worth considering whether this is the right one for your situation. And then how can you put in safeguards, contingencies, emergency plans that really, where a facility is sited, ensure that the safety of the surrounding community is first and foremost.
That's very, very important because prior to citing a facility in any neighborhood, it's critically important to get buy-in from the community. So you must hold your conversations with them early and often. Any environmental justice community will tell you that they'd like to hear from you before you decide to purchase the property and spend hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars into your proposed project. Because after you've done all of that, it is virtually impossible for the community to have a say into what's going to impact them. So you need to start early and often, but most importantly, you need to also translate your information into the relevant languages of the folks who occupy that community. For example, if the community is primarily Latinx, then where do you think you should translate, or how should you translate? Where should you advertise? Where should you make yourself known? And the types of media that the predominant people use. Also, you need to have your meetings in locations where community members feel comfortable. So it is very important for you to have them tell you where the appropriate locations are. And one of the things that always amazes me is that when you have your meetings with folks, you speak in a language that nobody understands. Oftentimes it is definitely Greek. So what you really need to do is partner with a community organization or someone else who can start first, educating the community before you even talk to the community, before you even make your presentation. Let people understand what you are about to say so that they can ask the appropriate questions. All of this before deciding on a location and while developing the project, while spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on developing the landscaping and the remediation and the architectural sketches before completing a draft permit. All of these things have to be done prior to. And also consider providing community benefits, providing benefits to the community. How are you going to benefit the community and in what ways? All these things must be thought about prior to you coming into a community and just deciding to set up shop, open up the doors and say, we're open for business.
So I would note that right now, the way that current regulations work, intended initially in their creation to give the public a voice before plans are finalized. Companies, as Sharon has alluded to, spend a lot of time and money preparing their plans. And then that draft plan, becomes something that people have the chance to respond to. That's sort of the regulatory structure. But in practice, what that usually means is after all that money is spent, any sort of community engagement often becomes an opportunity for the facility that wants to site there to defend their plan rather than to think about solutions to the concerns that communities are raising. So what we're encouraging folks to think about, and we'll talk into more depth about sort of the continuum of engagement in another slide or so, but really looking to enhance public participation, to have a dialogue that is early in the process. This is something that New Jersey has now put into law. So different states have different regulations. New Jersey has a law requiring enhanced public participation processes in environmental justice communities. New York currently has a regulatory commissioner's policy from our environmental agency that allows for that to be called into play, but it's rarely put into practice. And so there's a bill that's very similar to New Jersey's moving its way through the legislature here in New York, where I am. So this is something where you're going to see a variety, but we were hoping to encourage, and what the community engagement guide that NERC and NUMOA have put together is really aimed at those best practices that result in the deepest community engagement and the ones that most empower community residents to have a say in what's coming into their communities.
And I might add that Connecticut has an environmental justice law that's been on the books since 1993, signed into law by Republican Governor Jody Rell in 1992, but became effective in 93. Ours was the first in the nation, and it was primarily a public participation law, and it didn't have much bite to it, didn't have any sort of enforcement provisions. And a lot of people criticize it because of that. I don't criticize it because of that. I say that this is a great first step. It allowed people to be involved. The public participation process is extremely important. It gave guidelines to the prospective permit applications to tell them what they needed to do with regard to communicating with folks, how to communicate, how often to communicate, where their information was supposed to be printed or placed, whether there were placards in front of the building, whether there are relevant newspapers of the community. So I consider our first law a definite success. People in the state of Connecticut understand that they do have a right to question and to fully participate. And I do believe that that was the intent. Throughout the years, we have changed it. And in this legislative session, we're tweaking it once again to make sure that it's more meaningful and impactful for the folks who are devastated by the impacts of all types of pollution.
So, as I mentioned before, there's really a continuum, and a lot of the way that regulatory structures are designed, often it's focused on the informing sort of early stage of just broadcasting information out to the community, or perhaps getting feedback in a limited fashion. But there's really a lot of steps that can be taken to ensure the community co-design and acceptance of programs or facilities that's worth really exploring. So, this is in the community engagement guide in more depth. There's more to this table than you can see on the screen. But Sharon, do you want to start by talking about informing?
Sure. It's really important for you to inform the community about what you're doing, how it's going to benefit them, and of course, society as a whole. So, newsletters, fact sheets, open houses, demonstrations, models of the facility. It's really important for them to see exactly what you plan to do and provide additional resources, links to additional resources that people can go to educate themselves on the process so that the next time they meet with you, and there will be a next time, they'll be able to ask even more poignant and impactful questions that would affect their decisions.
So the next step up, besides just broadcasting things out to the community so that they have information, is to then solicit feedback in a fairly regimented process where you're sort of constraining the conditions of response. So you're looking for feedback on alternatives or analyses or decisions through techniques like surveys and focus groups and community meetings. So that's where you're asking for input at within the defined parameters that you are in your own framework for.
Exactly. And the next one is involving. It's really important. Involving means integrating people into the entire process, working with the community members to ensure that their aspirations and concerns are considered at every stage of planning and decision making. So when you have a meeting where you have maybe workshops or whatever, listen to what people are saying. How do they feel about the design of this? How do they feel about the additional traffic? How do they feel about the odors? How do they feel about the fact that their property values may decrease as a result of this ugly looking facility? You must take their concerns into consideration if you want to be successful.
And really, I think there's an opportunity now to move into collaboration in situations like this where an anaerobic digester is being considered, and that would bring, so instead of it being like you go out to the community and then they give you feedback and you come back and do work and then you go back out, there are methods through advisory boards and other strategies where people are actually at the table during those decision-making processes, and helping to actually guide the approach that's being taken, which means that community members are actively participating in what the final outcome is, and in a more collaborative and connected way, as opposed to being sort of like you come out from behind your wall and you go talk to people and then you go back behind the wall, right? Like there is a strategy and solutions that can really help ensure talking about how to do things, right? How do we solve these problems, and then learning from the community what the solutions are best for them, and helping to then shape the program in ways that really reflect that, and doing it in a way that has community members engaged throughout, and integrated into the process.
Now, this last one, empowering, has been an issue that has caused much pushback from the developers, because their concern is, this is my business, I'm running it. How dare you tell me how to operate my business? You don't have any experience, you don't have any authority. And we push back, well, fine, then put it where you live, because we deserve and we have a right to determine our own destiny. We have a right to tell you how much traffic, how much noise, how much poor air quality, how much poor water quality, how much poor land use and visual impact we're going to take. So we do believe that we should have a full say in how this operation is run. Unfortunately, a lot of facilities operators will give us the impression that they will allow us to do this. And after a year or two, all that empowering and collaborating and involving and consulting and informing disappears. So to be successful, you need to plan on including all of these things for the life of the project. If it's going to last 30 years, then you need 30 years of informing, consulting, involving, collaborating, and empowering.
So that's the goal, and it's requires a shift in perspective from a lot of the standard regulatory approaches, but it results in something that is much more beneficial for the community and the longevity and well-being.
So the most important thing is to develop a communication strategy where, number one, it's a two-way thing. But your strategy should involve identifying who you should be talking to. Who are the key stakeholders in this community? What do you want to communicate? And when? When do you communicate? As we said previously, communicate early and often. It would be great to have you say, hey, community, I'm thinking about developing an anaerobic digestion facility in your neighborhood. It'll be great for you to say, at the end of the day, this facility would eliminate the incineration process and the landfilling that adversely affects your health and well-being. Would you like to come hear about what we propose to do? And you do it often. Then you decide where. It's important for the community to say, okay, Mr. Developer or Miss Developer, I'll meet with you, but let's meet here at this community building, or let's meet at this church, and let's meet here. It's important for the community to decide where the in-person meetings are going to be held. And also you need to find out what's the preferred social media that they use. Is it TikTok? Is it Zoom? Is it Insta? Something, I don't know what that is, but find out what people listen to, go to, are on all the time, and communicate via those types of media so that you can let people know, hey, this is what we want to do. You can't just stop at your traditional way of informing people. Most developers will put an ad in the local newspaper, like the Hartford Current or wherever state you're coming from, and they'll think, okay, that's fine. But what you should understand is most community folks don't read the predominant newspapers of their locations, because those newspapers tend to shed a negative light on those communities. So they really depend upon smaller community type newspapers and newsletters and Facebook and all other types of social media. So you need to understand this. And the way to understand this is to identify those key stakeholders who can tell you where to go.
Great. This is a little bit more sort of the same as before, and really understanding the community and how to reach them before you move on. Sharon, I feel like you covered that in the last slide, so
I did, yeah.
I'm going to keep going.
So it's important for you to listen, and most developers don't listen. When people talk about the noise, listen to what they're saying. How does the noise impact them? When they talk about the traffic, listen. The odors, the pests, the environmental impacts, the health concerns, listen, because you don't experience these things. They do. And you can't come in there acting like, well, you know, I'm doing this for you, so therefore you should be able to tolerate the noise, the traffic, the odors, the pests, and the health concerns. But that is not correct. I shouldn't have to tolerate anything, especially when this is a regional facility that you are proposing, which means that other cities and towns, and sometimes other states, are trucking their organic waste and other things that are used that the anaerobic digesters digest into my neighborhood. So you don't have a problem with the noise or the traffic or the odors. So you really need to pay close attention to how all these things are impacting me, because when you get rid of your stuff, your garbage, your waste, it doesn't go to where you live.
I think that's really a key piece of why the community engagement and in moving into collaboration is important, because it's oftentimes, we know that we talk about, you know, solutions to environmental challenges and how that's a good thing, right? We sort of like put it in capital letters as a good thing, but there are always impacts. And when the people who are benefiting are not the same people who are experiencing those impacts, this is where we end up with environmental justice concerns, right? And so communities that don't have historically had facilities cited in them are the ones that live with those consequences, and the benefits don't necessarily come to them. Now, this could vary, right? You could have a lot of food waste coming from grocery stores and restaurants very close to communities that are environmental justice communities. But even still, at the end of the day, minimizing the harm and maximizing the benefit is really the key. And that's what community engagement helps design, right? If you're co-designing this with the community and they're the experts on what the impacts are and what they're experiencing, you can really leverage that expertise in order to have a facility that has community acceptance and really is not doing harm and is reversing sort of the current structure of the way that systems have been set up in the past and impacting communities disproportionately.
So it's critically important for communities to have a sense of empowerment by determining exactly how much they're going to accept. So it's important to have a meaningful seat at those decision-making tables. Not just any seat, because what happens is people would reserve 1 or 2 seats at a table, And it's sort of like a joke to us because they know that they won't listen to us. They don't respect our opinions. They don't even respect our experiences. So what you need to do is seek input from those community members who are at those decision-making tables, because they can alter things that are accommodating to them. Simple things like even where the entrance of a facility might be located. You might decide to put it on the north side of a building, but the community might say, no, the north side is not a good side. Put it on the west side. Simple things like that. Community needs to be at those tables with every decision that you make, starting with the location, the product design, and of course, operations. Now, let me just briefly talk about operations, which has been a sore spot to a lot of communities. As I mentioned earlier, jobs are offered, and it's like a carrot to communities. Now, if you're going to a community that is unemployed or underemployed, where the majority of the folks are extremely poor, the number one thing they need for oxygen is a job. So they will decide to leverage health with economics. I really need a job, and I know that the air quality is going to kill me, but I really need a job. And I know that the traffic and the noise are going to irritate me, but I really need a job. So they will go in favor of what you're planning to do because they want a job that's promised to them that's going to be meaningful and a livable wage. Unfortunately, when the facility is built, those jobs sort of disappear, and the developers bring in folks from different cities, different states, different whatever, and the community's jobs are relegated to the most dangerous, most insignificant, and the least paid jobs available. So what we do as an organization, prior to the facility being built, we ask for job descriptions for the potential jobs, and we go out and help find folks to fill these positions, because I cannot tell you the number of times I've been in arguments with developers who tell me, well, yeah, we promised jobs, but we can't find any qualified people. That drives me crazy. So I find those qualified people that they can't seem to find. And I think I glossed over something that's also critically important. You must involve folks in the construction of the facility as well, and meaningful jobs where they're paid not just to be an apprentice, they're paid meaningful jobs that are of the wages of the facility, or wages of the day. I forget the term of that wage thing, but it's really important for you to offer people meaningful wages with project labor agreements. There are some good ones and there are some bad ones, but people must be able to contribute in a meaningful way with jobs that will take them out of the realm of poverty.
I think one of the things that you can also consider in the in this process, we talked about community benefits, and there's the opportunity to do workforce development to actually train people in the community, as well as identify people who are already trained to help make sure that those high-skilled jobs can and do go to community members. So workforce development can be an additional component to layer onto already finding people in the community who have those skills, and helping to build the base of people who have the skills to do the work that maybe more that you would otherwise, that companies otherwise often bring from outside. So that's something that then you're empowering community residents to be able to go on and work other places with the same kind of skill sets.
I want to also indicate that the term I had forgotten was prevailing wage, not living wage, the prevailing wage, which is quite high and is equal to what the other folks working on the job are getting. But may I just say one thing, and I know we're just sort of going off a little bit, but this is something that really tears me apart when it comes to employing folks. The developers should not assume that everyone in the community should be coming in at the apprentice level. There are a lot of experienced folks who are able to work in various construction jobs and different trades. But unfortunately, the way that the project labor agreements are worded, these experienced people can't work on the very projects that are in their own communities. So one of the things that we do is work with them to determine the best project labor agreement that benefits everyone in the community, because not everyone in an environmental justice community is poor, just the majority. Not everyone in an environmental justice community is uneducated, just the majority. So there are lots of people who live in environmental justice communities who are able to leave but choose to stay. You must understand them. Communications must be two-way. That's the key. Hear people, listen to people, let them speak, and take what they say and determine what it is that you need to use from what they say.
There we go. That's our presentation, and Marianne's going to help moderate the questions. So if you've got other questions for us, please feel free to put them into the chat so she can grab them. Sharon, I'm wondering whether you've got any kind of template or successful kind of agreement that you were just discussing that we might be able to make available if people were interested.
I do. I'm modifying it as we speak. I don't know how soon I can make it available, but I can make one available. I have one that's a bad project labor agreement, and I like to display that one because on its surface, it looks great. For example, it states that the contractors must hire folks who live within the community. And people think, oh, that's great, that's great, that's great. But just think about this for a minute. If you are an experienced construction worker, and we also know that the construction trades are some of the highest paid, are you still living in Hartford? Or are you just moving on up? If you're making $2,000, $3,000 a week, are you staying where you are? Or are you going to go to the suburbs? 9 times out of 10, you're going to move out of Hartford to the surrounding areas. So saying that you're only going to hire or give preference to people who live in Hartford excludes those experienced people who no longer live in Hartford. So what's left in Hartford is a pool of inexperienced, untrained folks who, when working, work at the lowest levels possible as laborers and as apprentice workers. They get into these training programs where they often talk about, all I get out of this is a certificate. I've spoken to a lot of people who have books and books and books of certificates, but no jobs. So I'll stop there because I don't want to turn the direction away from what we need to talk about.
Okay, Bobby and Sharon, thank you so much for your presentation. Just wanted to remind everyone, if you have questions, to post them in the chat. And I wanted to mention that as part of this NUMOA NERC project, we had completed several documents, and the links to them have been posted in the chat. They'll also be resent to you with the follow-up email that includes the links to the presentation as well as the recording. One of the questions posted in the chat asks, how hard is it to get an anaerobic digester built anywhere in New England? I would suggest that you take a look at the regulatory guide that we developed for this project. It outlines the air, water, waste, and EJ requirements for each of the 11 Northeast states when wanting to site or operate an AD facility. And that's a great resource to use. I don't know, Bobby, if you or Sharon have opinions about AD operations at wastewater treatment plants. Any thoughts on that?
So Sharon, do you have something?
Well, no, I haven't really thought of it, to be honest with you. I'm trying to think now. The only one that I know of personally is one in Connecticut, well, in the Hartford area, in Southington, Connecticut, called Quantum Biogas, and they only handle organic materials and food waste. Wastewater treatment plants. I would not like it. I just can't imagine how that's going to be safe for any community. But Bobby, if you have any other opinions on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so in the chat there was it's been a lively discussion that I popped open with the referencing PFAS. We know that PFAS ends up because of widespread use of PFAS in consumer goods and manufacturing processes. We know that biosolids at wastewater treatment plants do have high levels of PFAS. And so I think the issue is really what is the digest state going to become? And I think that's an open question. It's a challenge that I think any solutions for wastewater treatment plants are challenging because we know that, for example, up in Maine, where biosolids spreading on land and agricultural land was very heavily promoted, that there are numerous farms that have discovered that the PFAS contamination from that has made the food that they were growing or the dairy that they were raising from the cows that they were raising from that land no longer saleable as food. And so I think it's really just important to think about where the outcomes get directed at, where the outputs are directed. So I think that goes beyond anaerobic digestion into sort of just the broader challenge of a lot of where my work is to turn off the tap on toxic chemicals. So these conversations don't have to happen. And we're like, hey, it's organic waste. This is great. We can use it for going back into organic cycles. But unfortunately, that isn't where we are in 2024.
Thank you. Another question is the routing of food scrap towards a compost site instead of AD part of your considerations as well?
Absolutely. Our first consideration is at the very beginning, trying to avoid the waste, period. If you can find someone to give it to, for example, the situation in Boston I spoke about, we're trying to eliminate this food going into the waste stream to begin with. So yes, composting is a very good way to eliminate the food even going to an anaerobic digester.
Mhm.
And I think the question becomes when you're thinking about how, for different facilities may have different access to different kinds of technologies to handle the waste and to turn it back into a nutrient within their geographic area, right? So this is just where we're starting from and why we place that question at the very top of the considerations when you're thinking about anaerobic digestion is that the strong solution as part of your wasted food solution. So if you get into the question of that and you say, yes, AD is a good solution, and then a lot of the discussion that we're having follows. But composting may be a very viable option. And if you've got successful, large scale composting that can effectively break down the food scraps that you have, that, we're not advocating for one technology over the other.
Exactly. It's a part of the overall waste management solution.
Any recommendations on how to inform and involve communities deeply while also preventing disinformation that might come from a few individuals?
Well, I think we've gone over most of those recommendations, but I will tell you that I cannot stress enough that you really must be embedded in the community. I mean, you just can't have a one-stroke approach where you drive by or drive through and throw out some flyers on the neighborhood or speak to a few, even if you speak to a few stakeholders one time, you really have to be embedded and so that you will understand exactly who the community is, how to communicate with them, what their concerns are. Like I said, listen to people. Don't do the typical drive-by, sit in your car, observe people, and drive away and say that, oh, I've done a great job. This is what I've observed, and this is what they want, because we all know that that is not true. You have to be sincere in your approach.
And I think that you're never going to get away from people having, disinformation is sort of commonplace with every topic in 2024. But I think that's where, when you have the kind of trust that Sharon's talking about building, you can actually have community members talking with each other about accurate information, right? So you have people who are out there who understand what's going on, who can, it's not a simple, like, we're over here trying to tell you the right thing. It's really that you've deepened the community understanding. I think the more that you do the deep engagement that Sharon was talking about, the more, the less disinformation is going to stick or going to spread.
You're right, Bobby. And one of the things that I do, which I find to be so effective, which a lot of people don't like, is I come out with the opposition. I come out first talking about the disinformation. And I say, yeah, some of these things are going to be true. However, we're going to do our best to mitigate these things. We understand that nothing is 100%, nothing is perfect. But all we're asking is that you make an earnest effort to mitigate the harms that this facility may cause, and be honest about the negatives. Don't just talk about the positives without talking about the concerns or the negatives that may come along with this process. If you do that, then your trust is totally destroyed, because every community knows that there's two sides of every coin. And if you only talk about the shiny side and not the dull side, you're telling me that you're lying. You're telling me that you're holding something back. You're telling me that there's another side to this that I might not like, and you just don't care.
I'm wondering how to identify the most appropriate community organization to partner with, especially if you're in an urban area where there's lots of different organizations that exist. How does one go about identifying the best one to work with?
Well, I'm partial because I run an organization that's an environmental justice organization. But if this is an environmental issue, environmental concern, I would look for environmental justice organizations. And I know for a fact that the state of Connecticut's Department of Environmental Justice has a complete listing of all of the environmental justice groups in the state of Connecticut. So if you're not aware of who we are, where we are, I would suggest you go to the Department of Environmental Protection of your state and ask them if they can assist you with identifying the appropriate environmental organization who could help you.
Bobby, did you have any?
Yeah, I think in general, you want to look for organizations that are representing the community, right? So that they're led by and serving the same people, right? Like, so that you're actually reaching community folks and not, for example, reaching sort of a technical organization, or you know what I mean? I think if you want to reach the community, you have to look for the groups that are doing work in the community. And I think it may also, in addition to looking for environmental groups, I don't know, Sharon, what do you think? But I would look for groups that are doing other kind of service work or support for community members to, like that if you want to have a community conversation, it's the groups that are most deeply embedded in the community that are going to be the ones best able to help support a dialogue.
Well, of course, I agree with that entirely, because, the environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts include all types of social service groups, from housing to education to health. So you really do need to include everyone. But when it comes to the environment, not all of those organizations understand the pros and cons of what it is that you're doing. So everyone needs to be at that table when you talk with those stakeholders. More importantly, the folks who live in close proximity to your facility, you really need to reach out to them.
Has there been environmental justice community engagement such as listening sessions and stakeholder meetings for waste generators, such as a farmer's market event to divert the available food in novel ways that benefit the community?
Well, so far in Connecticut, we have not done that, but we're beginning to do that as a result of what I saw in Boston. It was really an opportunity for me to see a missed opportunity that we have in Connecticut, because we really do need. My first question was, are we doing this in Connecticut? Because I was totally shocked that Massachusetts allowed it. So from the very moment I got back to Connecticut, I started making calls to people about, what are we doing about the food waste? We already know that there's a serious issue with food waste in schools and in hospitals and convalescent homes and all types of institutions. So we really do need to have everyone at those tables. There's no reason for people to be hungry in Connecticut with the amount of food that we throw away. Good food.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that I see for today. Bobby and Sharon, I want to thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts on this topic. And we applaud you both for the work that you are doing in working with communities on AD and other issues. And I want to thank everyone for who has attended today's webinar. And again, we will have the presentations and the recording available to you later this week. And I just wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you.